This is how two teams won the same game of football. Football is a game decided by the smallest of margins, and depending on which way the pendulum swings, it has the biggest of consequences. Welcome back to the Butterfly Effect, where we are looking today at a game that took place on the 26th of December 2020, a game that was both won by Arsenal and Chelsea. Heading into this game, Mikel Arteta's Arsenal were in 15th place in the Premier League, while Frank Lampard's Chelsea had begun to slide. They started off the month of December top of the league, but things were starting to unravel slightly with losses to Wolves and Everton. The pressure began to pile, and naturally as a Chelsea fan you could see that with Roman Abramovich. This was a must-win game, but for both teams. Arsenal were winless in their previous 7. They hadn't won in almost 2 months and were 3 points off relegation. Sam Allardyce, in fact, prior to this game, called Arsenal relegation candidates. The pressure was beginning to build and build and build for both managers going into this game. Now, Mikel Arteta put a lot of faith into the youngsters at Arsenal for this game, with Smith Rowe, Saka and Martinelli all starring and shining. Arsenal ran out 3-1 winners at the Emirates, and it began to turn the tide at Arsenal. Arteta started to build on that, and they finished the season growing and seeing more signs of development, and that's only continued in their trajectory towards the top of the league. Now, while the tide turned in a positive sense for Mikel Arteta, pressure only built further, and Roman Abramovich's remorseless acts that Chelsea fans are so familiar with was beginning to swing. Losses to Manchester City as well as Leicester left Roman Abramovich no choice but to sack Frank Lampard, with Chelsea down to 9th in just a month and a half. Who did Chelsea bring in? Chelsea brought in Thomas Tuchel. Not long after his spell at PSG had ended, a near Champions League winner with that club, Thomas Tuchel joined Chelsea, and the tide very much turned. Chelsea went to their old favourite, something they feel at home with, a 3 at the back, something they'd had much success with Antonio Conte not too many years prior. A few of that squad were present and they knew how to adapt to that system, but new players, could they adapt? The answer was, yeah, they fucking could. Thomas Tuchel had Chelsea growing and growing with each and every performance. Atletico Madrid in the Champions League looked like a game Chelsea were dead certain to be out of when the draw was made and Frank Lampard's men were drawn against Simeone's Atletico. However, Olivier Giroud's bicycle kick sent Chelsea on their way to a 1-0 away win over Atletico Madrid before defeating them 2-0 at home thanks to goals from Ziyech and Emerson Palmieri. Chelsea went from strength to strength, managing to get back into that top 4 as well against their Champions League final. And this was no fluke. Chelsea dealt with Porto with aplomb, but they also managed to punish Real Madrid and should have punished them further. Those games, honestly, particularly the home leg, that should have been 4 or 5-0. We were absolutely brutal and ripped Madrid to shreds, but we'll get into the Champions League final. Chelsea would have gone to face Pep Guardiola's Manchester City in their first Champions League final, and we'd had 2 rehearsals. Pep and Tuchel at Chelsea and City had faced each other twice just in the prior month. Once in the FA Cup semi-final with Chelsea winning that, and once in the Premier League with Chelsea winning that. Surely Thomas Tuchel would not dunk on Pep's bald head 3 times in a row. Yeah, he fucking did. Chelsea were Champions League winners for the 2nd time, something that was absolutely unbelievable to think about when Frank Lampard was getting the sack in 9th. Although, come to think of it, that's the way Chelsea behave. I mean, who'd have thought we'd win the Champions League under AVB? Sacking managers and going on to win trophies, it is the history of Chelsea under Roman Abramovich. Not so much these new ones. Then, in Thomas Tuchel's first full season of the club in 21-22, Chelsea would lift the Super Cup again, and they would lift the Club World Cup, the only trophy that had eluded Chelsea under Roman Abramovich. Chelsea had lost to Corinthians in the final under Rafa Benitez when they won their prior Champions League. However, this time, no mistake. Chelsea had won it all. We'd completed the set, and it was the final trophy under Roman Abramovich, who was ousted mere days later, or at least sanctions were put in place that meant that he would be ousted very soon. So without that 3-1 loss to Arsenal that compounded the pressure on Frank Lampard, Chelsea would not have completed the set in winning it all. Meanwhile, over at Arsenal, Mikel Arteta was building something in the long term, and it's something that's only gone from strength to strength to strength. That season where they defeated Chelsea 3-1, they did finish 8th. However, the following year, 5th, narrowly missing out on Champions League with Spurs just pipping them to 4th. But Arsenal fans were buying in. Players were buying in. There's a belief instilled amongst Arsenal that I fear, I'll be dead honest, because they're continually building on that, with last season them coming very close to winning a league title, falling apart at the end. However, this season they're currently top of the league going into April. They are in the Champions League quarterfinals, and the thing is that worries me most, even if Arsenal were to win neither Champions League nor Premier League this season, I worry they will win one or the other or both at some point in the near future. And that's because they're going from strength to strength to strength under Mikel Arteta. And I hate to say that. I really hate to say that, Chelsea fans. I'm sure Arsenal fans love hearing this. I'm being completely honest with them. They've got a lot of young, talented players, obviously, that are going from strength to strength, but they're nurturing that squad perfectly with perfect additions at most points. Funnily enough, it might benefit them in Europe having Chelsea Champions League winners that were under Tuchel in Jorginho and Havertz, who have real know-how with the competition. Kai Havertz is someone that I know he's a player that's very much criticised. I had a lot of patience with him, rightly or wrongly, and I don't know if he's that guy. I don't know if it's an amazing choice of spending the money that they did spend on Havertz when other players might have been available, but he does tend to show up a lot in big games. He is someone that works very hard, and I think in Champions League, he tends to have his better performances, not just in Chelsea's Champions League winning run, but also big games after that. I mean, Champions League last year against Dortmund, the year prior against Real Madrid, I still thought he was very good. Cup finals against Liverpool. Havertz tends to be one of those players that really suits those occasions. Anyway, enough about Havertz. Arsenal themselves are getting more experience. Whether they go out of this title race again, or they go out of this Champions League, they are getting more know-how. They are growing as a team in terms of mind and ability. And like I said, the pressure was very much building on Mikel Arteta going into that game with Chelsea in 2020. Had they lost that game, how different could things have been? Arteta out shirts were being printed by some fans, but they would have been in and amongst that relegation scrap for a little bit longer, that perhaps players wouldn't have the belief that they do now in their coach. They might have stayed resolute, but that's easy to say now. When things are going that poorly, people can down tools, or perhaps not down tools, they can lack belief in themselves, but lack the belief in the person that's given them these instructions. Because Arsenal are a team that mimic their coach, you can see how instructed every single detail of Arsenal is. And that's a credit to Mikel Arteta. He could be the man, and I fear he will be the man, to bring Arsenal their first Premier League in over 20 years. But he also could be the man that lands Arsenal their first Champions League ever. That better not fucking happen. But when you're in and around the conversation consistently, and as they're showing, they're building and building that consistency to be in these conversations, at some point, something might break. But it's just mental to think about. Has there ever been a game that's benefited both teams more? Chelsea's loss leading to Frank Lampard leaving and going from strength to strength and winning it all, completing the set, winning another Champions League. Well, Arteta, it took off some of the pressure. They were able to build. They gained in confidence, and they've built and built on that to the point that they could end up with one as well, or a Premier League, or both. I mean, certainly for Arsenal fans younger than me, this is the best they would have seen Arsenal. So yeah, it's just wild to think that you can pinpoint that exact game as a real turning point for both clubs. I hope you did enjoy that episode of the Butterfly Effect. Make sure to let me know in the comments if there's any you want me covering. I've got a big list, there's a lot to get through, but if there's any that jump out at you that you'd want me looking at in more depth, and remember, hit like, hit subscribe, in a bit.